Hi, I'm the True Wise Gamer, giving up my vast knowledge so you may understand games a bit better. What was the first game you ever actually had a choice in getting? Honestly, for me, I had two choices for my first time for PC. That was for Aerial Strike, a game I already covered in this video, so go click the link below. Shameless plug aside, the other game I actually got was a bundle, The Wizard War Chest. Basically, it combined two games plus another game made by the same company, Naval. That game being Etherlords 1 and 2. And Able Items, but another day. Another day. To talk about Naval for a moment, their only notable game is Might and Magic 5. Yeah, and that's it. Also Alon and King's Bounty, which I remember being ads for a while. But I have still no memory of where I saw them. I'm pretty sure they were from sketchy sites.
Honestly, it was an odd experience going back to a dead game and acting like, wow, what an experience. I gotta tell ya, I had a bit of a time trying to get this shit to work properly. See, this game belongs in that era of gaming where games were designed in a way that were not meant to be played on modern hardware and required either particular software or particular hardware, and even then not really. This game was no exception, and mind you, that was just Etherlord 1 by the way, because it doesn't work well at all, and will constantly crash, and that's including the Steam version. And I mentioned it's only the first because only the first one has this weird problem, and I still don't know what causes it. In fact, it was so bad for the review, I had to bust out my old copy of the game, which is scratched to hell but worked well enough, except for this little bug here on the screen with the cursor, but otherwise worked well enough.
But that's enough preamble for now. Since the time of changing is fast arriving, let's actually begin talking about Etherlords 1.
The first game begins with an intro talking about vague stuff about the way of the Lord, but it's kinda cool, it kinda hits me in my childhood. But also my pancreas. I'll just generally sum up the game's plot, or at least the idea of the plot. Basically, this is the land of Ether. In that land, there is something called the Time of Change, which happens every 1,000 years. During this time, the land changes into new places, and creatures come out of the woodworks and start ravaging the land. It also begins the chase for the Temple of Time, where the Lord of Time presides, which, whoever beats him becomes the new Lord of Time and controls the world. That is basically the premise of the game, nothing more to it. Now you're probably asking, who lives in this world? Well, in the land of Ether, there are 4 races. Those 4 being the Vatals, the Chaots, the Canets, and the Synfets. These 4 buy the land for power with their own cultures and creatures. And with the game being a strategy game about taking over the land and killing your opponent, how do you do that exactly? Well, by playing a card game with them. And honestly, it's okay.
To give a simple example of what it's like Magic. You know, that could actually apply to a lot of card games. So let's go a little more in depth.
I'll try to explain the game as best I can, but I am leaving out a bit of the nuances at times. You see, you build a 20 card deck, or a pre-built one is built for you, which is just basic. And even that 20 card limit I just mentioned is sort of a lie, we'll get into that in a bit. Anyway, you play these cards with Ether, where you gain an Ether channel per turn at no set max. I'll get into that more in a bit. As you can surmise, the idea is to reduce your foe's life to 0. How do you do that? Well, that's up to you mostly. Do you want to build a deck that's focused on high Ether turnover, with spells that allow you to gain enough Ether for the turn to summon something stronger? Or do you bide your time, waiting to build enough strength so that you can crush your opponent? Though sadly, those 2 strategies I just mentioned are going to be your most major strat in this game. You see, the problem is with the game doesn't really have much. Like Duel Masters, the roster is limited and the selection of spells is also very limited. Remember those 4 races I just mentioned? They are race locked, meaning they will not be able to mix with each other at all. Meaning you're stuck with a very select amount of spells that over time you'll see them again and again and get very bored with them. And mind you, even with the smaller roster, that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, as long as they're actually well balanced against each other, which they are not. I arguably say that they are very unbalanced, and it's quite hard to explain to someone what's wrong with them. Because I have experienced this game, and my biggest problem is that my ability to feel out these things could be wrong, since I am playing a game with no one else to help me to like show off, hey, maybe I'm misunderstanding this mechanic. Since again, not a lot of people know about this game, well, except the Russians, but you know, I have no idea how to speak Russian.
To simplify the races, let's go through them in order from best to worst. So that way I could actually talk about their archetypes a little more and actually explain what's actually they're about.
First up, let's begin with the Vitals, quite literally my favorite and just the best race in general. They have a very balanced and quite easy curve to them. They are a very more swarm deck with their ticks and fungi deck, but are overall well-rounded, with no glaring weakness except for draw power, which meaning if you don't have a good hand at first, you're pretty much boned. Chaos are just pure offense. They will try to overpower you with weak creatures, which they will try to buff the hell out of with either enchantments or sorcery, and also try to decimate the field, if they can. Like the Vitals, they have no real draw power, meaning if they draw a bad hand, they're boned, but it also gets a little worse for them. They also suffer from what I like to call no real different. By that I mean they have no real thing to make them different from other archetypes in that same group. Like a rat and an orc deck are pretty much similar, they just do it in different ways, but are otherwise the same. And as I mentioned, they're very one direction. Sure, they do have defensive monsters called walls, but otherwise, that's it. They are pretty much defined by their attributes, pure offense for better and for worse. Cadets, like their name implies, they basically try to do two things. To put them simply, they are just blue magic. They are a stall deck focused more on preventing you from doing something so that they can actually build up to their thing, gathering enough force to destroy you in a single swoop, building kinetic energy. Their problem is, simply put, if you mess with their plans a bit, they really can't do anything and just waiting for the ability to do so again. Like, they aren't bad, they just require a lot of understanding just to get it right, but are also a very defensive deck that allows them to just withstand most battles. I use them the absolute least because I'm not into their type of battle. It's a very slow and methodical play, which I'm just not into, I'm sorry. Synthets are a little weird about why they are designed this way. Basically, they are power with a cost. Some of them are reasonable in some regard, but most times than not, they are not. To give an example, all the races have a power-up or enchantment to just, power up a unit. But the Synthets have one that's just basically steroids that work fine at first, but slowly drains them. For the most part, they are more focused on destabilizing the field, which again, can work provided you aren't messing with them too much. And hell, some of their creatures are decent, but some of them just have horrible flaws, like the Velos, that are strong, but immediately die since they need to take damage in order to survive. But since some of them are so weak, they will just die anyway. Granted, they can work, but I'll explain it a bit. To go a bit deeper into the Synthet gameplay, they are a bit scum in their own way, as they're the only race, as far as my memory serves me, that just decimate the field by lowering everything's power and toughness, which affects them too, but they don't care that much. Basically, they're like Kinects, but worse, but also better since they also have option to do so, and you can easily tell how they do so. Now, if you notice for a while, I actually haven't even talked about how you get these cards to begin with. Well, you see, simply because I haven't even mentioned the strategy-esque gameplay, which is really important. Because you see, you not only need to buy the spells, you need to also charge them. Why? I'm not entirely sure. My guess is that they didn't want you to buy the best spells and then just steamroll everything. But you see, there's an inherent problem with that, and that being mostly because you most likely won't be able to anyway. For you see, depending on the map you're on, they will be only able to give you certain spells, meaning that you'll be likely restricted on what you can actually use. And even when you can, there are not going to be a lot of them, and again, the stage might prevent you from even being able to use these spells effectively. Hell, you might not even get certain cards for an archetype you'll need because your main character's abilities are tied to a certain archetype. This is where I'll need to mention abilities. See, characters, when they are spawned, are given a random ability. Problem is, that ability might be utterly useless because they can't gain access to the cards for that ability. And I mean, sure, you could try to re-roll a unit, but there's literally no need because here's the real problem with the game. It's overall way too easy. As long as you know the basics and know what to do, you'll be fine because most times than not, unless we're talking about the campaign, most enemies are not going to be worth your time except the random small monsters in the field. An NPC will never really challenge you in any effective manner. Hell, sometimes they won't even update their spell list, which is really weird. To give an example, on this map, the chaos I was fighting were not using any of the actual spells they could have access to. Thus, they were prevented from actually doing anything, meaning that I quite easily curb stopped them without much of a challenge. And as I mentioned again, the only time I ever felt challenged was with the campaign. And the only time I actually remember being challenged in the campaign was during the first cadet map, where you need to help defend of a tower building from a Synthet, who's going to destroy them, but the problem is that they are good and they will win unless you beat their deck properly. Honestly, I can't remember how I even won. Honestly, it's annoying since I didn't record it due to forgetting, since most times than not, they are worthless except the one spell you need for them, and even then, not really. And honestly, the campaign missions are going to last a few hours if you know what you're doing. If not, it's going to last a hell of a lot longer. Hell, it's not helped with how buggy this game is even without the stuff I mentioned earlier. Like, I just randomly spawned on a freaking bad part of the map where I couldn't move. I still to this day don't know what the hell happened. Or a mission not being able to be completed because I'm not entirely sure. Though honestly, you won't be playing the campaign too much because honestly, you're better off just playing the missions that some of them can take a while but are way more enjoyable, or duel mode where you pick a deck and actually face someone else, which is actually interesting because otherwise it's not that mentionable.
So, post-edit me here. I had noticed while I was going through the game, and while I was finishing up the editing process, I didn't actually talk about the music. My bad. In my defense, that's mostly because the music is very meh. Like, it does its job fair enough, but otherwise you wouldn't notice it. And in fact, I didn't notice some songs because they never played in game for me for some reason. I still don't know why. And really, most of the songs were actually transferred over to the second game as well, so even then I couldn't really hear a difference anyway. And now that just leaves us with the second game. So, let's get into that now, shall we?
The next game takes place around 800 years later-ish, though this detail is not particularly mentioned till near the end of our character's run. Regardless, Etherlords 2 has an actual campaign, and it's alright, has some good ideas, but otherwise lackluster. The game gives you two characters to play through. Either Eileen, the Fatale, who's trying to help her people from a synthetic invasion, or Connor, suffering from a Kinet invasion. Though they hardly matter in the plot other than they plant the seeds for revelation for the final character, which we'll get into in a bit. Hell, you don't even learn why they are doing this invasion until you play the Kinet and Synthet route, in which they are dealing with the new threat, the Pale Rust and Pale Creatures. Pale Ether or Colorless Ether is really weird since they can actually blend into other colors without issue, but still have things that make them wholly unique, that being phasing in and out. They can be summoned, but they aren't there until you actually phase them in, and if they die, they can sometimes, depending on the creature, return to phase out mode. And it's really annoying to deal with since they are in this weird place where they have more advantages than you more times than not. Hell, Connor, when he has to deal with one, has to be given a spell to actually be able to fight them. And I know like someone's going to say, well, you don't need to use it, but it clearly wants you to use it. The latter two routes actually gain access to them and are forced to fight them on regular basis, but also have to deal with the more annoying aspect, Pale Rust. It's basically a mechanic that the more you walk in it, the weaker you get. meaning it'll be harder to actually survive battles. Sure, you got spells and abilities, but living long enough to actually use them is another thing entirely. Actually, speaking on that, I'm gonna go into a minor rant here, since I really have nowhere else to talk about it. You see, I played this game on hard mode. You might be asking why mention that now of all times. Well, here is where it became an issue. To mention Connor again, he had to deal with this son of a bitch. You might be asking, why is that a problem? Well, you see, yeah, this enemy is weak, he is just a frustrating monster to fight in general, since not only does he have a monster that can remove enchantments, meaning your monsters won't be even able to naturally kill them, he also has better ether channeling, which let me actually get into that for a moment. I mentioned you get an ether channel every turn. Well, that was a lie. Well, a sort of lie. You do get them every turn, but not for the first 3 levels, where you won't get them as often, since upkeep is fucking you over, meaning you'll be unable to summon stuff or do anything at first, which really makes the game more difficult than it actually is at first, because here's the weird thing. After that, the game's actually way more easier, because since by that point, you'll be competent. And also, this is something else I noticed while going back through my footage, and because I really hate this enemy, I had to refight this bastard 2 times. But I also learned a weird thing about this game. You see, enemies will sometimes drop stuff, meaning you can actually gain more spells or certain items to help you out. Problem is, these are random, and the game never tells you this is random. Which really blows my mind because, no. Designers, please do not make random shit be mandatory to try to beat your game, because sometimes these maps require you to do things in a certain way just to be able to make sure you can beat them. Like also abilities. I didn't mention these during Etherlord 1 because they weren't that important, though they kind of are here, there, and it's complicated. I'll get into that now. Anyway, after leveling up, you gained a little small skill that lets you help out in combat, like drawing more spells every so often, or having more health in general, or regenerating a point every turn. While these are helpful, they aren't going to generally change the game that much. That's why I didn't mention them too often. Though, there is one ability that I do think is really good. Ether Disruption. There was a mechanic I didn't mention, that being Ether Disturbance. Basically, if a battle has been going on too long, the game will decide to just start hurting a player every turn afterward and doubling that damage until someone fucking dies. And it will decide on who will go first, depending on certain things, with this ability making sure that you have more chances to survive a little longer. So basically, if you're having a trouble with a certain enemy and you can stall out, you can actually win, which is kind of unfair, but whatever. Though speaking of unfair and a bit weird, I actually want to go back to talking about the cards again. While adding the new Pale Rust creatures were a cool idea, that was pretty much all that was added in this game. There are no new monsters, no new spells, no new artifacts, which actually I forgot to mention earlier. My bad, I have a bad tendency to forget things. Don't affect combat too much and I rarely ever use them. Heck, you can actually make some, but I never made them because they ask you to do things that are a little too specific for me. And again, they're not that useful. Anyway, to explain artifacts, they're just kind of abilities they let you have for a turn, depending on how many abilities you can use them, which is really dumb, but whatever. Back on topic, there is nothing really new in this game. I mean, sure, some cards were errataed and changed into different effects, but otherwise, we're still playing the same game. A little more balanced, sure, but otherwise, again, same game. Which, if you don't remember, I gave Kaishudo Showdown a lot of shit for not really adding that many cards into the game, which is still the same problem, but somehow way worse since we're still playing the same goddamn game. And really, the only difference between the 2 versions is that the strategy-esque feel from the original game is just gone. But on the flip side, it's at least able to challenge you now. So there's that, and honestly, I still consider both games to be alright. And I solely recommend 2 just because it can actually function, but otherwise, again, they're both fine. Back on the plot, you might be asking now, hey, what's causing the Pale Rust? Well, you see, this is where I had to explain the last game a bit more since it's a bit complicated. Remember that Lord of Time I mentioned? Well, he's actually called the White Lord, and this guy from the first game is alive. Most likely nothing happened and the powers return to their normal state, but things in the campaign happen. Also, might I add, that guy was bullshit. That guy was just impossible to beat because he was stupidly overpowered. So to explain, during the war, someone called Diamanda, a powerful Cadet, was kidnapped by the Chaos ordered by the Sinfet since they were working together during that time. The problem is they made her stupidly powerful by making her a mix of Sinfet and Cadet magic, and everyone just started fighting each other where she just caused havoc. The one who defeated her was a Vital, which we have no idea who that is, but it should be mentioned that, well, the game reuses assets from that game. In fact, the 4 main characters are reused models of the lords of the races, which you get the same ending regardless of which character you use. But that doesn't really answer the question, does it? What is he doing to begin with? Well, basically, he wants to rule forever, but the problem is that Ether doesn't like that, so he decides to try to open up a portal to the Rust dimension where there's some other plane. Don't worry about it, we're not gonna get into that, and using the Pale Rust to take over the world and make it so that no one will try to fight him. This is where Diamanda becomes important. The game intros actually shows her resurrection. He plans to make her very strong to protect him until the portal is ready, where he plans to just sacrifice her to make sure that the portal is kept open forever so that the pale creatures will stay around forever as well. However, Diamanda realizes what her master is doing and basically defeats him. This is also where I need to mention something where I had to mention again. This guy's a cheating asshole who really uses unfair spells and abilities against you. I really cannot stress to you how much of an annoying boss battle this guy is because he has unlimited spell charges and unlimited ether. And I mean, like, to be fair to me, I did beat him once, but that was a long time ago in my childhood where I had unlimited time. Here, fuck no. But anyway, the portal begins closing, but not fast enough as the Cadet and Sinfet heroes begin their charge in there trying to figure out what the hell's going on. Knowing that if they ever figured out what the hell happened here, they would try to open it again and cause more havoc, she decides to stand near the gate, planning on just sacrificing herself so that she could close the gate forever. Well, that's what happens. Which in all honesty is kind of sad. I mean, the character had an interesting story, and really, honestly, my biggest problem with this game's plot in a general sense, it doesn't allow for the characters to do much, and it's kind of pretends that there's going to be more story when it's over. I mean, the biggest example of this is Connor's ending, where he's basically fighting through all these monsters and this freaking dragon, and it ends with the main character going, "The hell? That it?" Hell, you would think that Alpha and Mira would be better, but no, if anything, they're worse. Hell, I don't even remember doing Mira. Or, hell, I don't think I did Mira because I remember her being so boring that I didn't want to even do it. I do want to mention again, I have beaten this game a few times before I've ever decided to actually review this game. And let me tell you, it wasn't that easy.
At the end of the day, is this game truly awful, or as mean as I made it out to be? Kinda? I mean, for all I said about it, it is a competent game. Like, it's not doing anything particularly wrong other than that bug. But otherwise, it's fine. They're both fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it graphically, again, except that bug. Musically, it's alright. The gameplay is alright. Everything about this game is alright, and nothing's really that spectacular or worth seeing. Which, in my defense, I think it makes the game even worse. Because there's nothing really that memorable about the game, other than the sort of strategic-ass gameplay, which it's not even that good at. If you do want to experience the game, that's cool and all. I just don't ever want to experience this game again. And that's really sad. I remember playing this game a lot as a kid, because I really didn't have a lot of games, so most likely I thought this game was alright, because I played it so often and didn't have much else to play. Next time is Digimon World DS, and actually getting that review done. But after that, and I felt like I might as well just mention this now, Somebody mentioned in the comments they really did want me to cover this game, so I'll just cover it next time after Digimon World DS, which won't actually take me a fucking month. Next time, Eternal Sonata. What is with me with playing games with starting with an E? Till next time.